We are going to look at a season of football in Edmonton that was possibly the greatest season in the history of pre-war football in the Alberta capital. It's fitting we are looking at that season this year, as it is that season's centennial. We're going back to 1921. 1921 was a big turning point, not only for senior football in Edmonton, but for the West in general. For the first time, all clubs in the West had switched to the snapback system that we would recognize today, where the center snaps the ball into play between his legs to the quarterback or halfback. 1920 saw only Edmonton and Calgary teams adopt this system as a trial, while all other teams, and Alberta teams prior to 1920, used this scrimmage configuration from the sport's rugby roots, where two extra men were employed to prop up the center scrimmage player, who would then heel the ball back to the quarter to begin a play. The change in rules allowed Western clubs to compete for the Dominion Championship for the first time, to contest the Grey Cup in 1921 and beyond. Whoever was the champion of the Western Canadian Rugby Football Union, the forerunner to what would become the Western Division now, would go east to try and win the country's top prize. Edmonton, immediately following World War I, had changed quite a bit. We went from 72,000 people to 50,000 for a metro population during the war years, and had started slowly climbing back to 60,000 and more following the signing of the armistice. The city itself was still filled with a patriotic fervor, and it was reflected in their sports teams as they adopted the Canucks moniker, as did Calgary for one of their teams on the Big Four senior circuit. In 1920, after switching back to the old names, Edmonton faced Calgary in a two-game total point Alberta championship. The Blue and White Esks lost the first game at home 27-16, but beat the Black and Yellow Tigers 18-8 in Calgary. Unfortunately, this gave the Southern team a combined 35-34 win over their northern rivals, but Edmonton was adamant that next year would be different. 1921 saw the teams have many returning players. Backfielders Jimmy Bill, Art Creighton, Captain Jimmy Enright and Billy Rankin, tight ends Russ Bullet Burnett, George Day, and Harold Blossom Seeley, and linemen Miles Palmer, Noble Stevens, and fan favorite Vic Yancey the Great, an all-star middle wing, which is the equivalent today of a tackle. New players joining the team who would go on to great success included halfbacks Curly Dorman, Dr. Marcus Dunsworth, whose son Brian would be with the inaugural 1949 team, and former Tiger star Jack Fraser, along with immovable centerman George Shyman. The first contest saw another first in Edmonton, as the Hamilton Tigers, on tour of all the western cities, came to Edmonton, marking the first time an Eastern club visited the provincial capital to play an exhibition game. Hamilton had done the same tour in 1913, but skipped Edmonton, who would go on to win the Alberta Championship that year, but had decimated all Western teams, not allowing a single touchdown in 4 games versus Winnipeg, Regina, Moose Jaw, and Calgary. This year, they again swept the Western clubs, beating Edmonton 15-3 in one of the closest games on the tour. This game would prove the last for lineman Mo Lieberman, who was injured in the game, but stayed on as the club's manager, a position he held for 4 years, before helping bring back the club in its green and gold debut in 1949, eventually earning a spot in the Canadian Football Hall of Fame as a builder. If the preseason game versus Hamilton shook up the club, they certainly did not show it in the season opener on October 1st, 1921 at Diamond Park, Edmonton's home field since taking up Canadian rules rugby football in 1908. The traditional rival Calgary Tigers came north to challenge the home side, with the memory of losing the previous season's playoff match by a single point. Head coach William Deacon White had his boys whipped into a frenzy and determined to do whatever it took to win, and what happened next remained in Edmonton lore for decades later. Calgary newspapers were touting their club as one of the strongest ever and claimed they didn't have a single weak spot on the roster. The fact that they were outscored heavily by Hamilton a week earlier was glossed over by pointing out that they had scored 3 times as many points as their northern cousins, and scoffed at Edmonton's bold claims that they were fielding the strongest team that the city had ever seen. Edmonton newspapers had a cautious outlook that the local heroes should win the game, But years of heartbreak against the Bengal rivals allowed the possibility that it would be a close game, and that fans should cheer the boys on to help them squeak out a victory. The weather at game time was seasonably warm, at about 5 degrees Celsius by the 3 p.m. kickoff at Diamond Park, and the fans showed up in droves to cheer on their boys. Calgary won the opening coin toss, electing to kick off to start the game, and Edmonton made them pay as the team worked their way up the field from their 20 to the Calgary 40 like a well-oiled machine. Time after time, the Edmonton line tore open massive holes for the backfield to exploit, as the sport was still in the era where the forward pass was forbidden. Newcomer Curly Dorman made his mark on the game as he took the first down handoff and sifted through a dozen defenders before crossing the goal line to open the scoring, converting his own major to go up 6-0 in the days where touchdowns, or try as it was still known belying its rugby roots, were only worth 5 points. Another oddity of early football in Canada is that the team that was scored upon then kicked off to the scoring team, so Edmonton got the ball back immediately after opening the scoring. Curly Dorman had a 35-endy run from scrimmage on their first down of the series, but Calgary stiffened soon after and they forced the first punt of the game, taking over at their own 20-yard line. This rally was short-lived as Noble Stevens scooped up a fumble on the Tigers' first play from scrimmage, and on Edmonton's next play saw Dorman again circling the line for another blue and white touchdown, followed by Jimmy Enright getting on the score sheet with a major, and Calgary was reeling, down 16-0 just past the halfway point of the opening frame. Calgary finally got a break when Leonard Red Wise fumbled on the Edmonton 20, but it resulted in only a single point when the Tigers were wide on a drop kick attempt, taking all momentum away from the visitors. Edmonton marched the ball after taking over on their own 20, and after switching sides were forced to punt to Calgary's Archie McTeer, who then fumbled the punt on his own 5, with Edmonton making them pay by Curly Dorman once again plunging through the line for another 5 points to extend the lead. Calgary's last spark happened when Edmonton again fumbled in the shadows of their own goalposts, but once again only produced a single point for the visitors. Much worse for the home squad was that Curly Dorman injured his knee and was removed from the game, but George Day moved from half to end and the rout continued. Calgary's final hurrah happened after successful runs of 25 and 20 yards by Edmonton's captain Jimmy Enright and former Calgary man Jack Fraser, respectively. Edmonton threatened from the Tigers' 10-yard line, but were stopped when the blue and white plunged ahead on third down, but were stopped short, and Calgary was awarded the ball on the turnover. This was about as good as it would get for the visitors, as they were forced to punt, and Fraser returned the punt by kicking it back to the Calgary end zone, where George Day downed the Tiger player for yet another point for the home team. While Edmonton's offense may have gotten all the glory, their defense kept them into the game as well, by forcing yet another fumble in Calgary's end, which was scooped by Billy Rankin, who dashed 20 yards in for the major score to lead 28-2 with little time left before the half. Jack Fraser added insult to injury as on the last play before the half scored another single point to be up by 27 to end the team to plan for the second half of the game. If fans thought that Calgary would come out itching to avenge the savage beating they were getting in the first half, it was clear that the black and yellow striped Southerners were already beaten in spirit as well as on the scoreboard. The great Yancey, fierce two-way lineman, caught lateral after lateral to score 3 successive tries for 16 points, with Rankin's convert on the first score. Miles Palmer got into the action with a 4th touchdown in the quarter, once again converted by Rankin to run the score up to 51-2 before the club switched side for the final frame. Jack Fraser, perhaps wanting to stick it to his former club, duplicated Yancey's feat by scoring 3 tries in the final frame, with Billy Rankin finally scoring a major before Fraser's last score, to bring the final tally to an astonishing 72-2 over the fully outclassed Calgary team. Nobody had ever seen a club dominate another in the short history of Canadian rules rugby football in the province of Alberta like this, and the 43 points scored in the second half alone were more than anyone could remember seeing scored in a full game, let alone a half. The loss completely demoralized Calgary, and within days of the game, the Tigers threw in the towel in the season, folding the club and not even returning to senior football until the 1923 season playoffs, not even participating in the regular season of that year's ARFU play. Edmonton was only getting started, however, as the team was determined to finally win not only the rugby championships, but the title of Western Canadian Rugby Football Champions and earn the right to contest for the Dominion title. But that, as they say, is a story for another time. For now, we celebrate the greatest victory in the history of football in the province of Alberta, which has never been approached, let alone equaled in 100 years of sports here. Today, we remember Jimmy Enright, Jack Fraser, and Billy Rankin, Curly Dorman, Bullet Burnett, and Blossom Seeley, and linemen Shyman, Palmer, Stevens, and the great Yancey. As famous as anyone in the West could have been a century ago, but for a few minutes now, heroes and legends once again.